Ever feel like you're just drowning in information about grief? Like websites, books, everyone's telling you to reach out, but like what does that even mean?
Yes.
Especially when you're in it. So today we're diving into your sources on grief and support groups because like finding your footing when you're already down, it shouldn't be another hurdle.
Yeah, and what I find so interesting is how these sources really emphasize that grief isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Oh,
Like,
totally.
it's easy to get caught up in those, stages of grief. You almost use them like a checklist,
Right.
but they're more like guideposts, I think. You
Yeah.
might not hit every single one, or you might hit them all out of order.
Right, like denial, anger, bargaining. It just sounds exhausting trying to keep track. It's like no wonder it feels so overwhelming.
Exactly. And even more than that, the sources highlight all these types of grief that we don't even talk about that often.
Oh, interesting.
Like, imagine someone facing a terminal illness. That looming loss that can create anticipatory grief.
So it's like pre-grieving almost, which I imagine would make the actual loss even harder to handle.
Oh, it adds another whole layer, definitely. And because grief is so personal, there's also disenfranchised grief. When the loss isn't something that society readily acknowledges.
Like if you lose a pet and people are like, get over it. It was just a dog or, the end of a relationship that other people didn't even know about, but you poured your heart into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And these sources really argue that honoring all those experiences is vital, which is where support groups come in.
Because misery loves company. I'm kidding. But seriously, is it really more than just venting?
Oh, it's so much more. Think of it like, you know how like on Reddit or certain online forums, people will have those "what I wish I knew before" threads.
Right.
It's that, but for grief. It's practical advice from people who've actually been there.
Okay, so you're getting real-world coping mechanisms, not just like, platitudes. But what about online versus in-person groups? Is one like actually better?
I think the beauty of it is that it's really tailored to you. Like, if you are not ready to be face-to-face, online offers that anonymity.
Right.
But if you're craving that in-person connection, then you got it. And then on top of that, you can find specialized groups, like loss of a child, for example.
Yeah.
Really finding your niche is key.
Yeah, yeah. But that first meeting, though, I think I would rather face a firing squad.
Oh, yeah.
Are there any tips from your sources to make it less terrifying?
Oh, they've got you covered.
Yeah.
First, knowing the group style, I think, helps. Like, is there a format for sharing? Are there confidentiality rules?
Right.
It's like checking the menu at a restaurant before you just go in blind. Kind of sets your expectations.
I love that. So less mystery dinner, more informed diner. What else?
They also suggest bringing a notepad. And not even for taking notes, but just to jot down your own thoughts. Because it's so easy to get caught up in other people's stories.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can kind of lose your own thread a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Giving yourself permission to process at your own pace, even in a group setting.
Yes.
Smart.
And then if it's comforting to you, they say bring a personal item. Maybe like a photo of the person you lost or
Right.
something to kind of ground you in your why for being there.
That's a really nice touch. It's like, this is who I'm here for. This is
Yeah.
what matters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, while support groups are so invaluable, these sources also highlight the role of bereavement counseling. Not as a replacement, but like an additional layer.
So it's less about choosing one or the other and more about what your personal toolkit needs.
Exactly. And we talked about how grief is so varied. So some people find a lot of solace in that community aspect.
Yeah.
But some people really need that personalized guidance that therapy can provide.
Yeah, it's like having all these different tools in your grief toolkit. Some days you might need the support group. Some days you need the therapist. And some days you just need a really good cry and like a pint of ice cream.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. But seriously, these sources emphasize the very real benefits of support groups beyond just like sharing your feelings.
Okay, so like it's not just an emotional release valve. What else is going on there?
Well, think practical advice, like navigating legal matters after a loss or finances.
Oh, right.
Even just simple coping strategies for getting through the day, things that you just might not find in like a self-help book.
So it's like crowdsourcing wisdom for dealing with like the logistics of loss on top of everything else.
Exactly. Plus, the sources talk about how support groups can really help normalize the grieving process. When you're in it, grief can feel incredibly isolating.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're the only one feeling this way.
You mean like even though we all know intellectually that grief is a universal experience?
Precisely. Support groups show you that, the emotional roller coaster you're on, it's normal. The good days, the bad days, the days where you even forget that you're grieving at all. It's all part of the process.
Yeah, it's like that feeling of validation when you find like a subreddit online for something super specific and you're like, oh
Hmm.
my gosh, I'm not alone in my weirdness.
Exactly. And speaking of feeling seen, these sources dedicate a good chunk to supporting grieving children and teenagers because their needs are so different than adults,
Oh,
obviously.
absolutely. Yeah, you can't just like hand a teenager a grief workbook and expect them to like connect with it.
Right. They really emphasize age-appropriate support. So, like for young children, play therapy can be incredibly effective.
Oh, wow.
Play is their language. It's how they process the world.
It's like how my niece used to act out all of her feelings with her stuffed animals, like they were her sounding board.
Exactly. And then for teens, peer support groups, I think, can be invaluable
Yeah.
because they're connecting with others who are going through similar experiences. And it just creates this space of understanding that adults, I think, sometimes struggle to provide.
Yeah, because let's face it, as much as we try to relate, sometimes you just need to talk to someone who gets it.
Absolutely. And then regardless of age, these sources highlight the importance of creative outlets
Mm.
like art, music, writing,
Hmm.
anything that allows young people to express their grief in ways that words sometimes can't capture.
It's like giving them a different language to communicate their pain and their healing.
Beautifully put.
Hmm.
And, while we often focus on just the emotional and social aspects of grief, these sources are very clear about the importance of self-care.
Which, let's be honest, can feel impossible when you're grieving. It's like, who has the energy for self-care when I'm barely keeping my head above water?
I hear you.
Yeah.
But these sources are adamant that self-care is not selfish. It's essential.
Okay.
It's about replenishing your own well-being so you can actually navigate the emotional and practical challenges of grief.
Okay, so what kind of self-care are we talking about here? Because, bubble baths and face masks don't exactly scream grieving person.
Right. They give some really practical, actionable suggestions.
Hmm.
Things like mindfulness. Even if it's just taking 5 minutes to breathe deeply, like that can make a huge difference.
Oh, for sure.
They also talk about gentle exercise.
So not necessarily hitting the gym for a high-intensity workout.
Exactly. Things like gentle walks in nature, maybe some yoga,
Right.
anything that just helps move your body and release some of that pent-up emotional energy. Because grief isn't just emotional, it's physical too.
Oh, absolutely. You carry so much tension in your body when you're grieving. I've definitely had those days where I just feel physically heavy with sadness.
And then, of course, connecting with loved ones is
Mhm.
crucial because it's really easy to isolate yourself when you're grieving, but maintaining those social connections, even if it's just a quick phone call or a video chat, can be incredibly nourishing.
Sometimes you don't even have to talk about the grief. Just being in the presence of people you love can be enough.
Exactly. And then finally, the sources remind us to engage in hobbies or creative pursuits.
Yeah.
Things that bring us joy and a sense of accomplishment. Because grief can really make you lose sight of who you are beyond the loss. So it's about reconnecting with those parts of yourself that make you you.
It's true. Sometimes those passions are the things that pull you back to the surface when you feel like you're drowning. It's true. Sometimes it's those passions that pull you back to the surface when you really feel like you're drowning.
Yeah, and one of the sources had this quote that really stuck with me, and it was, "Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. The price you pay for love, the only cure for grief, is to grieve."
Wow. That's powerful. It's like we live in a world that just wants to like slap a Band-Aid on grief and rush us through it.
Right.
But this is saying like, nope, feel it all, let it transform you.
Exactly. It's about honoring that process, allowing yourself to feel that pain, and ultimately finding your way through it, not around it.
It's about acknowledging that grief, as messy and painful as it can be, it's also a testament to the love that we've experienced.
Absolutely. And as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into your sources on grief and support, what's resonating with you? What's something you're going to carry with you from this conversation?
For me, it's that emphasis on self-care, not being selfish.
Right.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in this idea that taking care of yourself while you're grieving is somehow disrespectful to the person you lost.
Yeah.
But it's actually the opposite. Like, you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
So true. And for our listener out there, how has this conversation maybe shifted your perspective on grief? What small step can you take today to honor your own journey or support someone else through theirs? Maybe it's reaching out to a friend or exploring a support group, finally scheduling that therapy session, or even just allowing yourself to feel whatever comes up today without judgment. Remember, you don't have to go through this alone.